Yeah, here we go. Here we go, y'all. Another segment of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and tonight we're going to tackle a topic for the ages, if you will. Yes, we're going to talk about ageism this evening. And here with me is our panel of experts. We have Dan. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Calvin. Glad
And
to
we
be
have
here.
good to have you here, Dan. We have Amy. Hey,
Hello, hello.
hello,
Hey,
hello, hello. And we have Charlie.
Calvin, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Charlie, for being here and being here on all the time. We appreciate you, Charlie. The Cal
Nothing else to
Ripken of the
do.
podcast. Yes, sir. And we have Karen.
Hello.
Hello, Karen. And here with us tonight, we also have Mark. Hey,
Hi,
Mark.
Calvin. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Mark. Well, let's get right to it. Ageism. In simple words, it's the stereotypes that how we think, the prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act towards ourselves and others based on age. And tonight we're going to talk about some things with ageism. Is it right? In certain cases, especially in the workplace, is it right to start phasing people out when they get to a certain age, or is it fair to take on other people because they're younger? So let's jump right to it. Has anybody had any experience in this, either yourself or someone else, that you could share the story? Okay. I saw Dan's hand go up. Dan.
Okay. Well, I've experienced it in the workplace. My gray hair has given me some looks. I just tell them I'm glad to have hair. And I just, I used to be in a more technical field, and I got kind of pushed out because of my age. The things get smaller and smaller, opportunities. Um, it was very obvious that I got excluded because of my age. My experience wasn't important. Those kind of things, and I've seen it elsewhere also. People, the way I'm treated a little differently, the way I'm talked to is a little differently. Um, I'm a big believer in that ageism is the ism we all have to deal with at some point in our lives. We all get older. Now ageism can be young people also, and older people. We shouldn't have that prejudice against younger groups and older groups. And this whole ranking us by generations of boomers and Xers and millennials and Gen Z and stuff forces us into this adversarial role, because I believe it's a very important piece of diversity. And my own experience is, when I've been part of teams and part of situations where there are people from multiple ages, it only enhances it rather than detracts.
Now, Dan, you gave us some great pearls there, and I want to touch upon a couple of them. When you spoke about the ages, the difference in age, or discrimination against younger people, just as older people get discriminated against, younger people get discriminated against. They may not have the experience, or they may not have the education that's required for certain things. And, that's okay. But if you're putting together a team or a department or a company, is it fair to say that you don't want workers under a certain age?
Not necessarily. As long as they're capable. I mean, everybody can learn. Um, you know, it's often said that some younger workers don't have a work ethic and all these kind of stereotypes that we put in. I think they just work differently. I think they see it differently. And I actually give them kudos because they're not putting up with the crap my generation put up with. They're saying, hey, work isn't everything. And I think, the words are used against them now, like quiet quitting and things like that, where there's no such thing. It just means I want a work-life balance. I want to be fairly compensated. I wanted to be treated like I was hired as an adult. I want to be treated as an adult, not as a child. So I think it's just a different way to look at it. And I think that experience you talked about is really part of that. But it's like if you've ever been in a mentoring situation, when I've been a mentor or a mentee, I always learn on both sides. And that could be an older person and a younger person also. I participated a few weeks ago in a conversation sponsored by Braver Angels. They had a generational conversation, and I spoke with a college student, and we had just a wonderful conversation. And we come from totally different worlds. And it was a person I didn't know. We didn't know each other beforehand, and we found that we actually had about 80% in common when we really got down to it. A lot of the human things were the same.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was enlightening. I'd like to see other people see that kind of enlightenment.
And another pearl that was mentioned was about the definitions that we put upon ourselves: Gen X, baby boomers, millennials. And it's funny because just this afternoon, well, let me go back a little bit to a few weeks ago. In an organization that I belong to, Toastmasters, we had a demo meeting for a potential new club. And this club is one of the highest ranking tech companies in the world, basically. So we put on this demo meeting for them, and it was over 40 people in attendance and online virtually for this meeting. And we went through all of this steps that and the roles that you have in a meeting. Everybody seemed to be on the same page, and we left. And today they only have 8 people signed up. So the person that's in charge of the entire project asked me, do you think it's because it was all African Americans that was running the demo meeting? Now, we're all professionals. We came in there like gangbusters. For those that know Toastmasters, we were on top of our game, Dan, and we explained everything as we went along. There was no ahs, ums, ands. We talked about everything that they needed to know. And I said, well, that's a very interesting thought. However, here's something else to think about. Everybody that we brought was a baby boomer. And everybody that was there and everybody that was on the screen that I could see was a millennial for the most part. And he said he hadn't even thought about that. And just to go back a little bit more, then I'm going to open it up to some questions. A few weeks ago, I was watching a TV show, and the criminal was brought into the room for questioning, and the guy that was questioning him was a bit older, and the suspect suddenly just snapped and said, "Shut up, boomer!" And the guy, kind of jumped back a little bit, and to me, I was like, "What? I've never seen that before." But going back in my mind, I have experienced it now with some people, the way they treat me as a baby boomer. that are much younger than I am, 20, 30 years younger. I see the difference. Has anybody else went through anything like that? No, nobody has. Okay.
I have, oh, Kieran, were you going to speak? I don't want to talk over you. It's not directly related. So I'm Gen X. My younger siblings are millennials, so I'm not quite on the cusp there, but Gen X. But I remember after I was in the workforce for what felt like not too long, and really had to get used to the way things had always been done. You know, the message I got a lot was, this is how we do things around here. You can't wear, your Doc Martens to work. Tattoos aren't professional. Like you really had to kind of put on, something in order to go into the workplace. So fine, that if that's the way we do things, you dress up. And then the millennials came along, and I'm not trying to, I just was a little taken aback by how the rules seem to have suddenly changed, where they're like, now we have granola in the kitchen because we want to hire young people. And I'm like, can I wear my Doc Martens? They're like, no. Was sort of the message you were getting. They're like, oh, we're going to do this flexible work time because young people don't want to work for the company anymore. So this isn't quite exactly on, but I still to this day wonder, like, was it just a larger population? Were there enough kind of older Gen Xers in charge that they wanted to have a little bit more flexible? Like, what was it about that particular population where, at least from my perspective, the rules pretty dramatically started changing? Whereas, I didn't feel like there was really any give for us. Like, you want to work from home, that's too bad. You want the day off to get married, that's too bad. That's not the way we do things. So that's my perspective on it.
Well, one thing that we've learned in the last few years is that the way that businesses has been done does need to change for a myriad of reasons. And one of them is to accommodate, younger people that's coming into the workforce who may think differently, speak differently, may want to work differently. So the old rules do need to have a magnifying glass taken to them and see where changes can be made. However, there's still those of us that are, boomers, and we have value. We have value. So getting back on track here, we shouldn't be pushed out. We shouldn't be giving any menial task that's beneath us because of our age. Dan, you mentioned your gray hair. If I can just mention Charlie, I see your gray hair, and I have some.
Yeah.
And I have some when I grow it. I see.
Yeah, you're hiding
I see Mark's highlights there, and
Those aren't highlights. That's natural gray hair.
Oh,
No salon is involved in this.
Nature's highlights.
Right.
highlights, right? So, I mean, what happens with the 30-year-old person that comes in and happens to have some gray hair? Should they be discriminated against because they have gray hair?
No, I think what happens is a lot of the people in charge are older, and they are stuck in how people should behave when they come in, and ages, and sometimes with the older employees, the person might not move as fast as they used to move, but they're still competent, and they judge them based on that. And you can see sometimes where you have managers, supervisors who will start taking tasks away from older workers and giving it to younger people. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why? The person was doing it well. Mm-hmm. They always say, this person doesn't know how to use a computer. Well, what office do you work in that doesn't have a computer? And you're not computer literate.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've experienced just the opposite, where the older worker who was more experienced kept getting dumped on because they had the experience and the knowledge. They knew how to get it done quickly. Charlie, did I see your hand?
Well, not my hand, but I was just listening. Karen mentioned the word computers, and I was doing some research in this show. One excuse you can't use for us oldest folks now that we don't know computers. Computers have been around 25, 30 years. The internet's been around. I've been on it since the late 90s, and others, the rest of you probably been around that time or later on it. So we know computers, we know these basic things, and in many cases more than that. Because that used to be the thing that younger people would use towards older people. Oh, they don't know, they type whatever in and that. And that's not a valid excuse because we've had a whole generation of computers now.
I'm considered old because I write down stuff on paper with a pencil and a pen. That's considered old, It's like there's a whole generation of people that everything is pretty much in a tablet form, for notes. And I'm glad we're having this conversation. I just want to throw something out to the table. Our whole country is having this conversation right now because President Biden is turning 80. And there's a lot of people that are having a debate whether he should run for president again, because is he too old? And the other people are having the discussion of his experience. He's had a lifetime of experience talking to the other side, and all of that. When democracy hangs in the balance, we need experienced leaders. So it's a really interesting debate that's happening right now in our country about our president and ageism.
If I could add on to that about Biden, especially what he did in Ukraine here the last week or so, I was very impressed with him on that he pulled that off and he went into the Ukraine. That's never been done before, at least in recent times, for a president where we do not have soldiers in that country right now. So,
yep, indeed.
Well, I think also we need to be careful of the language we use. We've learned how to use different language with other prejudices, and I don't think we've learned with ageism. It's okay to make old jokes. It's okay to disparage the president because you think he's too old, even though he's been quite capable and vigorous in handling everything. The expectation that, once you hit 50, you shouldn't be in the workplace anymore. At the same time, we're told, oh, we could live into our 90s. So now we have 40 years when you're not supposed to work. Now, if you went the other direction with that 40 years, you would be 10. So think about that similar gap. We have this situation now where everybody is supposed to come in and you have to hit the ground running and have experience, right? That's what they want to hire. But you're supposed to get that experience without aging. I don't know how you do that.
It's a very good observation.
And one of the things that I've seen, especially in the larger companies, is a lot of the management now is really Gen X and older millennials. The older ones have kind of stepped out of those roles. And I know myself, I was in a management position at one point. I don't want to be there anymore, but I want to contribute. Am I supposed to stop working? Do I no longer contribute? I'm a person who's very open to having, if I work with somebody who is 30 years younger than me, I think they have a lot of value. If I work with somebody who's older than me, I have a lot of value. I like that mix. Ageism is left out of almost all DEI. If you look at
that is very true.
And my ask is really, can we change this conversation and stop calling it old and stop using the stereotype that you can't use a computer? Well, I was writing on the first PCs in the early 80s, okay? But I can also show somebody else how to use their phone. So I've seen it go from cards to apps, but that doesn't make me not able to handle what there is now. Right now, I'm still working. I contribute. I can, my experience matters. I am bothered by the fact that we discount experience now. And that, I think, is one of the root of the problem.
That is a big issue, because if you put them together, things can be so much greater because you have the young people who learned a different way. They might have a quicker, a better way of doing something, a way to work smarter and not harder, and there a lot of younger people are willing to share the knowledge and expertise. But you have some older people who want to challenge their knowledge because how can they know this? Why do they should know this? Not yet. They haven't lived long enough. You know that phrase? You haven't
Mhm.
lived long enough or experienced enough to know how to do this, that, or the other thing. So, if we give everybody a chance, and you can look at people, like you said, Dan, you're still productive. What's the problem? It's not like you're coming in and you're reading the newspaper or just tapping on your desk all day and not contributing. You have things that you do, you get them done in a timely manner. And if there are any problems, we fix it, right? But a lot of employees claim that they want people who are going to be flexible and they're not discriminating on age, but then they do. You tell a young person coming out of school that they don't have that, and they have their degree in this subject matter, that they don't have enough experience. Well, how are they going to get the experience? Show
You know,
them.
there's a
And
new angle on that. People who have retired are being asked to come back into the place, which is a recent phenomenon because of employee shortages and things, and that they wanted to bring those people back with the skill sets that they have, at least on a part-time level.
Mhm.
I think sometimes, to Karen's point, flexible is a code word for take advantage of you. Like, we want you to be flexible, meaning you haven't quite grown that spine yet, or you don't have that family yet. So they feel like, oh, we can get you at 80 hours, but we're only going to pay you for 40. I'm not saying all the time, but I think sometimes that flexible just means we don't want somebody who's going to push back against us.
and with experience should come equal pay for that experience. Doesn't make any sense to have 30 years of experience in an area and you're making, $28,000, $39,000. You should be paid for that experience, depending on what the job is. Or, but often to keep that job, an experienced person will smile and take what they can get because they know the job market is hard for them out there to transfer over and get another job. I have a word of the day for you guys. We've never done a word of the day. This is a word for looking younger than your age. Looking younger than your age. And I'm going to, I'm not going to spell it, but it's neanamorphic. Neanamorphic. Neanimorphic. And this is an adjective, and it means someone that looks younger than their age. Mm-hmm. So there are some people that can squeeze by and get those jobs. They may be 50, but they look 40 or 30 or whatever the case is, and they can get in there. And when HR realizes what their age really is, I guess they kind of put them in a special file, right, Mark?
Well,
Probably.
that's part of the problem. That kind of thinking, when we use language like you look younger than your age, or you're still got energy, or you're not changing your thinking, or those kind of things, that is all ageism.
True that.
So, it's interesting. I came across this statistic that ARP did a research and calculated what the economy loses by not allowing a lot of these older workers to come into the economy, and they estimated that we're losing $850 billion in gross domestic product.
Wow.
Okay, and Manpower did a survey of over 10,000 companies and asked them about And they asked them if age was a competitive advantage or disadvantage. More than 2/3 of the companies said it was a disadvantage. And those are the people hiring.
Mm.
So this is endemic. And it's
Wow.
something we have to think about. We hear about shortages where they can't find workers. And they're walking by them every day because their own internal prejudices are keeping them from hiring them. And this is the same fight that other groups have had to do and are still doing with their discrimination. And I think if you throw it in the mix, we shouldn't have ageism, we shouldn't have racism, we shouldn't have, gender isms and all these other things. It's part of that same thinking that I think we have to look to move away from.
Okay. Now, my next question is, this is something that I observed when I was a young man a long time ago working in corporate America. And I would notice the older people, and they always seemed angry. Do you think it's true that people get angrier as they get older? Mark's laughing. He's cracking up over there, but I think it's a real thing. Anybody?
I recently went to a folk conference. There's a gigantic national folk organization that has a conference every year, and they had it this year in Kansas City. And I work at a radio station, and I'm a radio host and producer. And so I thought I would get to know some of the folk DJs because they have their own group that meet at this conference. And I found them to be a little angry. And I didn't mean to do that, but they all were and they were actually talking about the future and how pretty much everybody in this room of people were like older white people, and how are they going to go into the future with more younger people taking their place, and what are they going to have to do for the future in terms of prolonging and keeping all of it alive, but when I stood up to speak, someone was like, "You've quit talking so much," or something. Someone like grumbled at me, and I was like, "Okay, fine." But I know I'm just sort of, it was just my own quick observation in the moment. It's not a fair assessment of all of these really incredible people who give so much of their time to keep folk music alive in their communities, on the community radio stations and public stations that they work on. But it was my initial response in this room. Everyone seemed a little bit more angry, but I think in some cases, as we have experience, I'm trying to choose my words correctly, not to have any trigger words or offensive words, but as we have more experience, we also have like less patience. We know how things are supposed to be done, and come on, get to it. You're wasting time. We have to get on with it. And having the energy and the courage of a 19-year-old combined with the wisdom of like a 57-year-old person or 59-year-old person, which is my age, it's like an ideal. But we have these at different parts of our life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have these things at different parts of our life. So I think sometimes with experience comes maybe not a rudeness, but let's get to it here. We got work to do. You know what I mean? Time's wasting where other people are, I don't know. Am I making sense to anybody?
Well,
No, go ahead. I actually agree with Mark. So I think, and I was going to make a comment earlier about, this kind of feeling also occurred in previous generations as well, my parents' generation and others. And yes, it could be old white males getting angry because they're just getting old, period, even though, there are other more factors involved perhaps now than there was back then. But it's like a cycle, and just now it's, my generation's turn on it to act that way, which hopefully I don't.
Yep, I was going to say that, with that example I gave, fast forward several decades, and I kind of understand why they were angry, because first of all, things are changing at a rapid pace. Okay, for those of us, Dan, that have experience in IT, we have a good basis to try to keep up, but still things are moving at a fast clip. And for those that may not have had the background or the basis, it can be pretty upsetting when things are like passing you by. Case in point, my mother-in-law had a flip phone several years ago, and she was cool. She was fine with that. But the flip phone died, or she lost it and had to get a smartphone. And now she's on her third smartphone in the last 2 years, and she just hates it. We get calls all times of day and night from her. She's butt dialing us or pushing the wrong button. And it's hard for her to understand this technology. And although we sit down with her and explain everything to her, how to find the contacts and all, she, when left to herself, this 85-year-old woman can't do it. And as a result, she don't want to use a phone. She doesn't want to use a phone, but we need her to have a phone so we can stay in contact with her. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So go ahead. I had the opposite experience. My mother's 94. She has an iPhone. She keeps her schedule on it, all her doctor's appointments and everything.
Wow.
Gets confused every once in a while. She's not moving as much anymore. She used to call Uber on it and get a ride because she can't drive anymore. So that's getting back to the language that I was talking about. We have to be careful to lump everybody in. We are lumping in, if you go 65 to 100, what is that, 35 years? We're lumping 35 years worth of people all into one group with vast different experiences. So all I ask is that we caution ourselves, we step back and we think about it, and we step away from those stereotypes. And as I told people, when I lose my keys now, I start to wonder, if maybe I was getting forgetful. And then I remember I used to lose my keys in my 20s. So, and I didn't think I was losing my mind then. So I would like to see us rephrase it, just like we've starting to learn to rephrase it with other groups that have been disadvantaged.
Okay, sounds good. And I'm going to end with this thought about which country does not have ageism, which country does not have it. Research has found that Korea, India, Brazil, and Japan appear less biased towards older people, as their cultures kind of focus more on group cohesion and harmony, rather than being individuals. So that's it. Well, before we close out, anybody have any last thoughts on ageism?
I think ageism is our society and our media plays a huge role in ageism. And I think the rules of ageism are so much different from women than for men. And men are almost allowed to age in a way in our society where women are not. And all of our cosmetic industry and Botox and everything is sort of geared around whether, and women who work in the film industry and in entertainment are judged that way. And I think that's part of this whole discussion that I want to just throw out there also.
All right.
That is so true, Mark, because when you look at all the reality shows or older celebrities and stuff like that, you see the reconstruction of their bodies, their faces, trying to look younger, trying to fit in and still make money, but they're still going to make money as a celebrity, because if they're good at, if their talent is what people want, they'll pay for it. But I just wish that we in America would stop with all the separation based on age, period. Everybody can learn. Everybody has the ability to learn how to do a job, a task. And a younger person is bringing in, as they say, fresh eyes. They might have a better way of doing something and help us improve and increase productivity, which is a lot of times what a lot of people don't look at. They don't look at the products that they're putting out, the ability to meet deadlines, and meet deadlines correctly with good information. So I think we need to give each other a chance.
All right. And I just wish they would bring back a flip phone that was also a smartphone and make my life a lot easier.
I got
When
a
we
flip phone.
we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to have our round robin discussion, which will be led by one of the panelists, only on Diverse Talking Heads podcast. And we are back. This is Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. And now we're going to move into the section of the podcast that we called the round robin discussion. Tonight it's going to be led by one of the panelists. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Calvin. So my topic today is a little bit related to what our earlier discussion was. And we live in a culture now where we segregate a lot of our elders. They live in their own communities and don't live with the families like they used to. And the elders of the societies have always been the storytellers. They carried the stories of the culture. And this is true indigenous cultures, European, Asian, all over the globe. And many cultures still use it. We see it less so in our own. And my question is, how important is storytelling in our lives and our culture?
Well,
It's very important. It teaches you who you are and where you come from. It shows you the beginning of your ancestors and how they became whoever they became. If they were successful, what happened to them, especially when they migrated from part of the country to the other part of the country. It's so important to know, because you have people out here who are actually dating relatives because family members didn't have conversations. And when you come from a small community, you must have the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
I think all art is essentially storytelling, and that art is a way of translating the world that we're living in right now in a way that we can understand it. I think that's what artists do for us, is help translate our reality for us. And storytelling is the essence of the news that we watch on television. It's all storytelling. And our elders who share stories of our family and our heritage, our ancestry. My partner and I have been together for 31 years, and his mom, Julia, lived with us for the last 10 years of her life. And I loved her. She was so much fun to be with and to be as part of our house. And it just made our house richer in so many ways, to have that multi-generational aspect in our family. And to watch my partner and his mom have a mother-son relationship in the last 10 years of their life was incredibly beautiful.
and I will add that everything has a story. As a speaker, I found out that if I tell a story that has an antagonist and a protagonist in it, it builds up the story and makes it more credible and understandable for the audience to pick up on. And then I tie it into whatever my message is going to be. Because when you think about it, everything has a story. If you look at your shoe, there's a story to that shoe. Our lives, there's always a beginning. And even 5 minutes ago, whatever happened could be part of the story. So everything has a story and it's ongoing.
I agree with everything that everyone has said, and there's been beautiful expressions, and I'm probably not going to be able to speak nearly as eloquently, but I think to add on a little bit, that stories, we don't appreciate how much they help us understand our own identity, but through shared relationships. And just something that I think of is there's stories I remember that seemed like almost nothing when they were told to me, like, oh, this one time when my mom was a kid, she did this funny thing, blah, blah, blah. And I will just remember it. And sometimes when you need a smile, that can give you a smile. Or likewise, you can remember a story of somebody working through something, and it might have not meant anything to you in the moment, but then you can reflect and maybe draw on, oh, well, if they were able to go through it, then maybe that can help me. So I think that it's sad that they're not always seen as how valuable they can be, that they might be viewed as archaic or unnecessary, when I think that's very far from the truth.
Yeah, stories are a very human thing. And if you think about what you remember, you always remember the story. And, what are we losing when we're losing our stories?
I think we're losing our humanity and our culture and the reason, our understanding for why we exist. I know we have theater people in this group here, and that's the essence of theater, is the storytelling. That's why, Kelvin, you're so good at storytelling and talking about the story, because of your experience in theater. And the people who write all of these amazing plays, sometimes they have to have had a life to live to be able to write about what they write about. And I talk to young singer-songwriters who are like 21 and like, I don't know what to write about. I still have to live my life. And I think that's the thing about our like my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents. Their storytelling meant so much because it represented so much of a life.
My story is actually on two levels. I was adopted as a baby, and I grew up in an adopted family. So the stories that I generally got were particularly from my adopted mother. And when I was a young adult, I actually did meet my biological family. I had been born out of wedlock. My parents subsequently married, had more children, same parents, and divorced, and that. So over time, I started out with the adopted family, which, I heard those stories constantly. So they were in my head. And then as an adult, I got a new set of stories, about my biological family.
Yes.
Dan, did I hear you say in the beginning that we're losing our stories? And if so, why?
Well, I relating it to our last discussion, where we're pushing aside our, with ageism, we're pushing aside and discounting the abilities of our elders, and the way our society tends to just have a very youth culture and discounts folks who carry a lot of stories and carry our stories. Are we losing that? Are we not interviewing them? Are we not knowing our history? There is a resurgence in things like ancestry.com and stuff like that, and the wonderful program on PBS with Dr. Gates, slipping my mind the name,
Finding our roots, finding
our roots, and those kind of things. Watch their faces when they see the stories. it's not just facts and figures, it's stories, and stories we remember. And as I said, it's a very human thing. And I think we're allowing, even though we save everything and we film everything and we take pictures of everything, those just disparate pieces, or are we building stories? And are we teaching our children through stories and how to tell stories? And I think that will, and are we teaching them to go to older generations and ask for their stories? When my son was very young, he sat down with my father and spent several hours asking him about his life shortly before my father passed. We heard things that none of the rest of us knew just because he asked those questions. Ask the questions. Spark the story.
Well said, Dan. I agree with that 100%, because when I decided to do research on my family, because of my last name, it's so unusual, like where'd it come from? And in the process of doing the research, I discovered that the city had a previous name, and I was told what it was a long time ago, but I never put the two together. And then when I logged into ancestry.com, what pops up but the city that I was told it was originally. And I was like, oh, okay. But and just having a conversation, sitting with my great grandmother and just hearing her speak about different things, and I was telling some cousins from Colorado, I said, listen, when we go to South Carolina, we have to be in by dark. And they were like, what? I said, because it's real dark down here. And they're like, no, it's not that dark. I said, listen, it's invisible dark down here. So when they got there, we're, visiting different relatives. I'm like tapping my watch, like, let's go, let's wrap it up, people. Anyway, long story short, nighttime fell. They were scared to death because they had never been in that type of darkness before. From point A to point B until we got where we needed to go, and even pulling up to people's houses, it was still dark. So it's good to have conversations about where you come from.
Okay, wonderful example of a story, and we will remember it because it was a story. And thank you all. I'll hand it back to Calvin.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dan, for that fantastic round table discussion. And that's about all, y'all, for this segment of Diverse Talking Heads podcast. I want to thank our panelists this evening, Charlie, Amy, Dan, Mark, and Karen. And I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs. And it's always imparting that we take 2 steps to the rear and get on out of here. Until the next episode of Diverse Talking Heads podcast, exit stage left.